I think it's about time we do a video for the instructors. So let's talk about how to teach the role. Always make sure that your student is comfortable with the idea of wet exiting and having that grab loop out before you teach them how to roll. There's a lot to dig in here, so here is a quick outline. We're going to talk about the foundations for instruction, how to safely teach the parts of the role, which role is best for each student, and how to continue once they're successful. Let's get into it. A couple of foundations for instruction. Number one is obviously safety. But safety doesn't just mean physical safety. Sometimes it means emotional safety too. As an instructor, you have to be really careful about providing a safe place for your clients. They have to know, one, that their success doesn't affect me, and neither does their failure. If a student feels like they have to please you, then it puts that student in a state where they can't really relax and learn how to roll. One of the big things that I do that I think is really good for any instructor to do of any class, set the expectations early. Let the student know they're going to fail, there's a process you're going to follow, and even their mistakes are just going to happen as a part of the process. That is a normal piece of learning. Setting that expectation of learning and the learning process early on really takes the pressure off of your student, and then they're going to learn faster. If a student is afraid of water, my goal is to get them comfortable with water and to comfortable with me keeping them safe. I hate that it has to be said, don't hit on your clients. It's always important to keep it professional and to keep some healthy boundaries. You have to stay calm, collected, and clear and level your entire time as an instructor, no matter who you're teaching. As far as physical safety is concerned, I'm very careful to prevent a student from ending up in a situation where they could hurt their shoulder. So I don't hold their paddle blade. Specifically, I put my hands over the paddle shaft so that I can keep their boat close, or the paddle shaft close to their body, and so I can quickly reach underneath them to pull up their torso if I have to. As an instructor, I can't stress enough for the safety of your client. It's better to be standing next to them so that you can support their body and make sure they don't get overstretched and injure their shoulder. There's a lot of instructors out there who recommend and love to teach from their kayak or to teach rolling off of a brace. But the problem with that, falling onto a brace, especially a high brace, can put your shoulder at increased risk. Very few times students have a good enough brace that they can depend on before they have a good roll. Getting overstretched over your client and not really being able to manage their body puts them at additional risk as well. So for the safety of your clients, I highly encourage you, get out of your boat, get wet, stand in the water with them.
One thing that I always recommend instructors wear is a helmet. Even teaching people how to roll at a pool session, I can't tell you how many times I've been hit in the head or chopped at the feet with a paddle blade. It's part of being an instructor. And the last thing you want to have to do is worry about getting stitches in your head or something like that from a carbon paddle. And that might be dramatic, but it's really just easier. It's one less thing to think about, and as an instructor, you really want to focus on the client. You really want to focus on your student. So you don't want to have anything else that you're having to do. It is good to be light on your feet for when the paddle goes deep. So anytime the paddle's low, expect them to stab it at your toes, because if you don't, you will next time.
Every time a client flips in one direction or another, they're going to float in that direction. So being prepared for where they'll float into and making sure you're in a position that's obstacle free is necessary. The second thing is meeting your students where they are, emotionally, physically, in terms of skill, because meeting them where they are is the only way to progress them further. You also have to be able to adapt your language. One of the most challenging things that I've seen working with other instructors is that we all have our way of saying things and teaching things. But not every analogy works for every student, and not every type of language works for every student. So you have to be able to adapt. The most efficient instructors are able to adapt what they're saying to get the point across. And always, always, always celebrate your students' wins. Celebrate successes. Let them know you're excited for them and that they did it, and they did it well. That was a great hip snap. That was awesome. You're progressing, you're improving. It has to be a positive experience. Every piece of it does. Whatever compliments you can give them on their technique, wherever you find them, make sure they have that positive reinforcement. What you want to avoid is lots of negative reinforcement. Be clear, be honest about what they're doing in their role, but give them a solution, not a problem. It's your job to see the problem and give them the solution. So the solution could be, all right, let's try to relax our body more and use more hip. It's also okay to say, you didn't hip snap. That's okay, let's try to do another one. Let's use our hips. So start by relaxing, flick your hips. Say it with a smile. It's totally okay. You want it to be safe, fun, and enjoyable for both of you. Let's talk about rolling. So one of the big key factors in the roll is the separation of upper and lower body movements. If a student can't separate their upper and lower body movements, they're not going to be able to roll. So I always start by letting the students rotate from side to side, getting used to that idea of torso rotation. When they get really comfortable rotating side to side, I have them stop and shift their hips side to side, making as big a splashes as they can with their kayak. Now it's good to be there just in case they get a little too aggressive and try almost flip. I like to be close enough to where I can catch the boat. But what this does is it shows them the two separate movements that they're going to need to roll. Then I have them do both at the same time. That's the first time many of these students have had to truly independently operate their upper and lower body. If they can do it well, they'll be well on their way to learning how to roll and do many other things in whitewater kayaking. The other foundational piece that I highly recommend that you teach your students is the safety box for paddling. The paddler's box refers to the paddle and the chest lined up with the arms. The thing is, if you move the paddle away to the side without rotating your body, what it does is it breaks up the shape of that box. It doesn't look like a nice neat box anymore. So the goal is to maintain that box so if your paddle needs to go to the side, you can rotate your entire torso with it. The goal of the safety box is not only to protect your shoulders, but it also maintains a power position where the paddle is in front of your chest. You get the most out of every stroke and every move that you make. All right, how I teach the hip snap. I always have the student rock their hips side to side for a little while, and I try to make it fun. Once they can rock their hips really well from side to side and understand that movement, typically, I support them in my hand with their head at water level. I prefer to only use one hand, and there's a reason for this. One hand for me and one hand for the student prevents both of us from putting too much effort into their roll. When a student uses two hands, that top hand has to cross their body, and it actually counteracts their hip snap. It can hinder their hip snap and make it harder for success. It encourages them to push with both of their arms. So one hand for your student is ideal, the low hand. As an instructor, I may start with two hands, expecting them to put more pressure, but I'm going to gradually switch to just the one and measure how hard they're pushing on my hand. It's good a lot of times if you have a student that's struggling with their hip snap to have one hand to support them and to let them know, hey, I'm going to support your body if you're having trouble hip snapping up because I want to keep your shoulders safe. And I use the other hand to support their hands. So if I have to lift them up out of the water, I can. As a student's hip snap progresses though, and they get to a point where they're able to hip snap really quickly, then I might look for the next step of the roll. If a student's having trouble dialing in how to hip snap exactly, I'll put them on the side of a pool or give them something that floats to push on, and I'll stand closer to them and explain to leave their head down and only flip their boat. That way their head never leaves the water. A student's head never has to leave the water to learn how to hip snap. They can relax, which is vital to hip snapping, and just stay at water level. All you need is the boat to go from upside down to upright. Once a student has a really good hip snap and I barely even feel them push on my hands, then I start telling them, all right, it's time to flip all the way around. And so it happens really fast. This doesn't take very long, but it takes as long as it needs. The student flips all the way over. I make sure they have my hands. 9 times out of 10, the first time they do this, they're going to reach toward the surface, and you'll have to position your hands underneath them because they may grab your hands the wrong way. Students do the same thing when learning how to T-rescue on a kayak. They often hug the kayak from underwater and then wonder why they can't make it to the surface. So you have to teach them to move their hand on top to be able to come to the surface. So the first time they flip is often just getting them comfortable with the idea. And then after a while, they get used to being able to flip around, grab your hands, and hip snap up. And so the goal there as an instructor is to watch their form, watch their head, and make sure they're relaxed. What you're looking for in a hip snap is a good, snappy, relaxed hip snap. You'll know they're relaxed because their body will still kind of be hanging there. They'll snap right upright. Their boat may even have the tendency to almost flip on the other side. A good, fast hip snap lets you know they're ready for the next part. So the next part that I show students all the time is when I give them the paddle, I show them the setup. Here's the thing. There's a lot of ways to teach the roll off of a brace. And ultimately, as you gain experience, you're just going to feel for pressure on your paddle blade and you're going to roll. But when you're learning, you need the setup. The setup gives the student a home base, a safe home base that they can always come back to restart their roll. Teaching with the setup also gives a student that constant feedback of, let's go back to the setup if my roll didn't work. How many times have you seen somebody fail at a roll and keep stabbing at the water, not getting any better? The setup allows a student to reset, regroup, and reattempt a roll from a neutral position. It makes them more successful in the long run. Instructors a lot of times will have a student tuck forward in order to set up. The problem with tucking forward for the setup is that tucking forward hinders your hip snap and often prevents that opening of the sweep. So the setup involves torso rotation. You have to rotate your torso independently of your lower body. And your paddle goes down next to you. Now, a lot of people feel like you should really tuck forward to stay safe, to put the paddle to the side. But the problem with tucking forward is tucking forward prevents the hip snap. It might feel safer to tuck forward, and we may tuck forward in a lot of other situations, but tucking forward on the setup can actually kill your roll. You can experience this in the pool. Sit upright, rock your hips from side to side as far as you can. Now lean forward and rock your hips from side to side. Now lean back and rock your hips from side to side. Now do it again, just sitting straight up. Sitting up, having good posture gives you more hip mobility. So you want your student to sit up nice and straight and use that torso rotation to rotate to the side. Not just reach to the side, but rotate to the side. And don't forget, when you teach the student the setup, to turn the wrist down to create that gliding angle on the surface. If they don't get in the habit of turning the front wrist down, the paddle blade was going to be at the wrong angle and it'll just slice through the water. So on that note, I always have students do something that's a little bit funny. I have them hold their paddle up above their head and go back to the setup. I have them hold it neutral and go back to the setup. I have them set up on the opposite side and then go back to the setup. I have them cross their arms and lean back and get confused and go back to the setup. Them wave their hands and go back to the setup. The goal is to create the muscle memory and to tell the body, go back to the setup. The easiest way I've found to really teach that rotation and that reach for air is I actually have the student roll back in my arms and I cradle them with one arm with my hand on their paddle. And what that allows me to do is I support them upright with their head on my shoulder, but we're able to talk and move the paddle around, and I can show them how it feels to feel a little bit inverted, how it feels to be in the water. They're still above water, and how to move their paddle through the sweep. And when I tell them to hip snap, they get a feel for the roll. Students a lot of times will try to visualize how to do the sweep and hip snap in a lot of different ways upright. But the problem with all of those techniques and all of those ways that they visualize is they often visualize it wrong. So it's important to make sure that you talk them through the process and show them with that muscle memory, that physical action, show them how to move their body through the roll. Once a student's comfortable with the motion of sweeping and hip snapping, I make sure that they feel comfortable flipping all the way around, and I let them know, talk them through it. I have them flip on their left if they're going to be rolling on the right. I start with them flipping all the way around. It just gives them confidence and it lets them know that they're reaching for air. So I explain to the student, you're going to set up and reach for air until you feel it. And I tell them your job is really simple. Your job is to relax, feel what I do with your paddle. I'm going to pull your paddle up into a good setup and I'll pause. Then I'll sweep your paddle and I'll hit the bottom of your boat when it's time for you to hip snap. Your one job is to feel what happens and hip snap when I hit the bottom of your boat. What often happens is the student will flip and they may have trouble getting their paddle to the surface. So I look for their paddle and I pull them into a proper setup position. And I make sure that their arms are touching the side of their boats. They feel it, that both their hands are out of the water. And then I position their paddle for the sweep and give them a hip snap. It's important to understand that the sweeping motion does put the shoulder at a little bit of more risk than normal because it kind of leaves the box. And so that moment of opening their body on the sweep is a vulnerable moment for them as a student. So it's important to be ready to safely support their shoulder and not just lift them by their paddle, which is attached to their arm. As the student gets better and faster at their hip snap and being able to go through the process, I make sure that we do it perfectly at least a few times before I give the student a chance to do it by themselves. The reason for that is really simple. I want to maximize the number of times that a student does it right. I want the student to have as many right motions as possible when compared to doing it wrong. And when I give the student the opportunity to try it on their own, they have one attempt. The reason is really simple. The ratio of positive muscle memory to negative muscle memory has to stay on the positive side if you want them to keep their roll. So teaching a student and letting them try over and over and over again and then finally getting a roll can reinforce the negative habits more than the positive ones. So what I do is I make sure that those students are comfortable with the whole process. I hit the bottom of their boat, they hip snap, they come up, we talk about it, and when they're ready, we just do it again and again. Every single time, I celebrate successes, I let them know what's good, and I might give them some feedback as far as what to do better. Feedback usually includes something like, let's do more hip snap. You pushed really hard on your arms that time. Did you feel that? Solving that issue of using too much arms is sometimes simply watching the paddle blade to make sure they're focused on hip snapping. The watching the blade actually engages the proper knee. It engages the right side of the body so that they're able to roll. If they're lifting their head, it's usually because they're cold, they're tense, they're tired, or they're trying to muscle it. It's important to remember that the head is a symptom of two other problems. If you're pulling with your arms, that means you're not using your hips. The other thing the head does, and pushing with your arms does, is it engages your other knee, which pulls you back upside down and kills your hip snap. If you have really good separation of upper and lower body, you can roll just fine with your head upright. There's a lot of ways you can word this, and there's a lot of ways you can demonstrate it. Another way to word it is to only pull on the low knee. Find what works for your student. Sometimes it can be because they don't have the flexibility to do a C-to-C roll. Anytime you have a student that is larger, not very flexible, or a little bit more tense than other students due to nervousness or just natural tension, I typically recommend learning a sweep type roll. The sweep type roll is a little harder in the sense that when you have them set up, you have to hit the bottom of the boat and they hip snap while you sweep the paddle. It gives them more to think about and more to feel, and it might take them a second to get it, but it actually can help them quite a bit. When I have a student that's smaller and more limber, or in shape and athletic, or very relaxed and flexible, I teach them a C2C roll because you can break it down, slow it down, and it's easier a lot of times for them to digest that information. It's a special moment when your student gets their first roll. It's so amazing. Celebrate it. Let them know that was awesome. Then it's okay to just go for it again and again for a moment if they have the energy. Go ahead and reinforce it. Get a couple of good rolls in, but keep the rule. One attempt, then I help. That gets them used to going back to the setup as a home base, and then you guide them through to reinforce the proper muscle memory. When you reinforce that proper muscle memory, they're gonna have it. Also, make sure you warn your student again. You got your roll, it's awesome. You might miss it, and that's okay. You're probably gonna still go through a lot of the same mistakes that everybody else goes through, and then you'll have your roll down. Once they're successful, they're gonna wanna keep going, and you can keep going for a while, but only as long as they're successful. We all wanna end on a high note, but pushing for that high note through a whole bunch of failures can reinforce the wrong muscle memory. So sometimes it's better to quit while you're ahead, rest up, and come back. Hope this video was helpful. If you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe. I'll see you on the river.